participants who are already on board. Just to acknowledge that we will be recording this session. I'll begin by acknowledging the Indigenous cultures and of our nation. I'm here in Sydney. This is Gadigal land, so I'd like to very much pay our respects to our Indigenous cultures and our First Nations people. Welcome to this webinar on Denmark's biomethane integration into the gas grid. This is a second in a series that RACE and the Trade Council of Denmark and Australia have run. It's really looking to build upon the knowledge and experience that resides in Denmark and to see what we can bring to Australia in terms of lessons to fast track and implement biogas as a renewable source in our Australian context. I'm Bill Lilly. I'm the RACE for 2030's CEO. RACE is very much looking at decarbonisation of our Australian economy. We do that predominantly looking at impacts within the distribution network. Biogas is one of the critical enablers that we see for decarbonisation, and we know that it's a very large potential that's been looked at for multiple decades, but we've yet to reach that resource and to unlock that potential in Australia. So today we're very fortunate to have a number of very experienced speakers bringing their Denmark knowledge to us in the hope that this will be able to fast track and enable biogas uptake in Australia. I will begin very quickly by introducing Dorothy DeLosa. She's the Senior Advisor for the Trade Council of Denmark in Australia, one of our partners, and we're very proud to have her here. She will be introducing each of the speakers, and later on today I will facilitate some of the Q&A from our participants here online. Over to you, Dorothy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bill, and thank you everyone for joining us on this webinar. And as what Bill mentioned, the Trade Council of Denmark here in Australia has been working closely with RACE 2030 on this space. And I'll just share a short overview of what we have done so far and why we're doing this. So again, Dorothy here. I'm the Senior Advisor of working under the Agri-Food, Bioenergy and Water. The Trade Council is a nonprofit organization, and to simplify it, our main role is really to bridge Denmark and Australia working together on best practices, knowledge sharing, and that's what we are currently doing here. We work in different sectors with renewable energy space, sustainable cities, waste to energy, agri-food and bioenergy, and also energy efficiency, because as we know, Australia is now focusing on decarbonization of industries. We have done a series one, so this is a continuation. We did one knowledge sharing about an introduction on how Denmark has successfully achieved their bioeconomy and bioenergy space. And we have also engaged with Australian delegates that we have did a study tour together this year. So the main essence is that we invited all the Danish experts to bring across that knowledge and share it with a broader audience, and also working together with RACE 2030 and also our collaboration partners here in Australia. This photo will be very evident and again, very common, as you've seen on most of the reports and literature. And you'll be hearing more of these from our experts and also some updates from our local industry experts today. So we have a full packed program. So sit there, relax, and feel free to absorb so much knowledge. We have guests from Danish Energy Agency, Energinet, Evida, and experts from Ramble, and also our experts from Australian context. So what we have so far is we have heard, and also we're very excited that the Australian government now has committed to develop and build this bioenergy industry. So we are getting there. As what Bill mentioned, this has been going on, and they've been researching about bioenergy potential for over so many years since RACE 2030 started. We know that it has a great potential with our biomass feedstock abundancy in Australia, and that it could give economic and industrial benefits, also achieving the net zero of Australia. Therefore, we know that there is an increased focus, and by collaborating with international experts and international inspiration, especially from Denmark, who has reached 40% of their biomethane into the gas grid, we want to bring that knowledge and also share what were their challenges in establishing these bioenergy industry. So we would need also to have clear policies working with the public and private sectors. So I will now pass it on to our very first speaker. So Danish Energy Agency, just to let you know, is responsible for developing the national and also international agreements of Denmark and also other countries. They are responsible in managing the production, supply, and consumption of energy. They also monitor Denmark's reduction of carbon emissions. I'm very much pleased to introduce you to our next speaker, Christian Sorensen. He's the Chief Advisor of Danish Energy Agency, working on gas and biogas. Pass it on to you, Christian.
Thank you very much, and good evening to everyone in Australia. Glad to have this opportunity. I'm from the Danish Energy Agency, and my unit, we work with policy making in terms of bioenergy and also regulation and support schemes. So we had some experience on biomethane development here. What is important in Denmark is that we use residues from industry, from agriculture, and from households producing biogas and biomethane. The last 10 years, we have introduced new technology to clean the biogas so it can be injected to our natural gas grid and replace natural gas and fossil, and thereby fossil fuel. Also, the digestate from the biogas production is then transported back to agriculture as a fertilizer. So we have a kind of circular system there. Just a few words about the Danish gas system so you can know what it's about. It was built back in 1982. We had these large gas fields in the North Sea, and the whole system was built transporting gas from the North Field to most parts of Denmark through a transmission and distribution network. What we are doing now is actually we are turning the system upside down, and that creates some challenges. We are now looking into producing biomethane at a distribution network, and we will transport that to more centralized points of consumption. What you can see is that we have recently reached the target on producing 40% of our consumption, and that's quite astonishing. What we also have managed is actually to decrease our consumption remarkably by two ways. We have converted some of our natural gas-fired power plants to biomass, and also we are phasing out households now because gas is a very valuable energy source, so it should be used where it makes the highest value, and it's not producing hot water in households. This is a learning curve, and sometimes when we have discussions with policymakers, they do forget the whole picture. They look at the end where you can see the steep curve. However, the biogas sector started back in 1975 on an experimental level, and it took 40 years before the technology was really developed so it could take off and really make a difference. What we can see here, if we just focus on the last 10 years, is that we had a huge increase up to 2020. We have a huge pipeline for developing the sector further. And what we are discussing in Denmark is what kind of incentives are we looking into? Are we looking into production support, blending obligation, tax exemptions? Just a quick view on the history is up till 2012, we had only support for producing electricity. And what happened at that time, and that's quite an important lesson from Denmark, is that we had a very broad political agreement in 2012, setting up a support scheme for 20 years for biogas for electricity, for biomethane, and for heat, so that investors got certainty for their investment, and they had certainty on return on their investment. So we created an environment. Meanwhile, as you could see on the earlier slide, the technology at that time had developed. The upgrading technology was there. It was still at a very early stage. However, we could see that what we saw actually was that there was a huge development. It was so huge that the Ministry of Finance got a little bit worried about our support scheme, that costs were getting out of hand. So they stopped it in 2019 for new entries. So those who were on the scheme could continue for the 20-year time. However, new entries, we had to set up a different scheme. So there was a new broad political agreement in 2020 with 6 tenders from 2024. However, due to changes in how accounting principles is within the European Union and problems with export of supported biomethane to other member states within the European Union, we had to change the tender setup. So the green value would belong to the government and not to the biogas plants. So they could not sell the green value. And the Biogas Association was not very happy about this. So they actually suggested that instead of having these tenders, they would prefer a blending obligation. And if the biogas sector have this statement to the government that said, well, we don't need this kind of funding as a production support, we prefer a blending obligation. We are now preparing a government decision on changing the funding. Yes. What is central for this discussion is that if you have long-term production support, it's very important for investors. They get certainty on their investment. They have a long-term support. I'm sorry, but there are some changes within the European Union on how we count this. We have 2 principles actually, and that's the headache we are looking into. If we are talking about UN climate effect accountancy principle, then it's a point of consumption. And if it's the European regulation is the renewable share in each member state, and that's the point of consumption. So we have huge discussion about counting principles, and that's really a problem and makes this development a standstill. What we are looking into is a blending obligation. This might work in a mature setting as the Danish setting, because we have now developed the biogas sector. We have huge investors, pension funds and institutional investors in Denmark, and they can accommodate a blending obligation, which is based on short-term contracts, because if you have a blending obligation on traders, they will probably only give contracts on which will have a duration on 2 to 3 years. What our politician likes about this is that the consumers, they are now actually going to pay what it costs to choose biomethane as a technology. What we're also looking into is that we might also combine this with a tax exemption, and then the taxpayer would also contribute to the regulation. Back in 2021, we had some considerations about how far should we go, and we made this green gas strategy. It's a little bit old, but it's still valid. What we focused on at that time was that how should we prioritize the gas, and it should be the priority for the industry who have high temperature melting processes, burning processes. They need gas because electricity is not, the technology is not really there yet. And we should phase out households. The last 3 years we have phased out 100,000 households. We were going from 400,000 to 300,000 households, and we are continuing down that road. Security of supply has a bit overlooked important issue, because during the Ukraine crisis, when you have this huge amount of biomethane within your gas system, it consists of a huge storage capacity, and if you can actually have a storage capacity of 40%, it's a huge benefit in terms of security supply. You can really accommodate some large accidents from the outside if we have some supply cuts off. What we also are looking into is can we make the biogas production even more sustainable? And also now we are turning the system upside down. We have to reshape the whole gas network. It is the government's ambition to have 100% green gas in 2035. Now we maybe look into that it will be a little bit earlier due to the very high gas prices during the Ukraine crisis. We have a huge conversion from gas to district heating and also to electric heat pumps from the high schools. Looking ahead, you can see here, this is our prognosis. So we will be actually a net exporter on biomethane, or biomethane can be used for other purposes. This is actually the art of producing biogas. You can see we use a lot of manure from the agriculture. However, the yield from manure is not very high, so you had to add something else. And this combination is actually what makes biogas so important, because if you make the right combination, you can raise the yield. You can see we also have a lot of energy crops, and you shouldn't use food for producing biogas. So we are looking into how can we reduce that. However, it's a biological process, so the bacteria needs small parts of energy crops. We had an energy crop regulation. We started 10 years ago with 12%, and then the current limit is now down to 4%. And we are introducing a ban on maize right now, and we are looking into how can we raise the limit even further. Also, what we have realized is that biogas plants may leak methane, which is a very climate damaging gas. So we have a regulation on third-party control on the biogas sector with special cameras. Just a few words about the gas system. We are now looking into, can we use the gas system for other purposes? Maybe we had to decommission some parts of the distribution network. Maybe we can convert some of it to raw biogas, so we can transport it to power-to-X plants, or we can convert some part to either transporting CO2 or hydrogen. And Niels will probably talk a little bit more about the conversion to hydrogen. So this is just a final here. We are going to adjust the system to new flows patterns and modify the system for new gases to transport. We had to modify our support scheme, and blending obligations might be an option combined with a tax exemption. And we are also looking to strengthen the sustainability. Just a few words about what I normally call the next chapter of the biogas story is that biogas can act. We have the CO2 source, and if we add hydrogen from, for instance, wind turbines, then we can actually produce more CO2. Or we can actually make methanol. If you use biomethane, CO2, and hydrogen, then you can produce methanol. And then in the end, you can actually refine this for sustainable air fuel. So that might be the next step for Denmark. We are now having the first production plant producing methanol for the maritime sector. Yes, and my neighbor is just having built, so I'm sorry if you can hear something there. My final slide here is actually the International Energy Agency. They have this potential map on biogas, and as you can see, there's a huge potential worldwide for producing biomethane. Well, there's a lot of work to do, and if we're talking about European Union, we have this goal of producing 35 billion cubic meters within 2030, and it's a huge task. However, the resources are there. So yes, this was all for me now.
Thank you, Christian. Appreciate the updates and really interesting on the next phase and the future, and also for giving us an overview of what is happening in Denmark and also future planning. Really interested to get a copy of those, and we will be distributing some the copies to our guests today. And for our next speaker, we are very much excited to have on board Niels Frank from Energinet. He is the senior engineer for gas systems and framework conditions. So Energinet is the transmission operator and owner in Denmark. And afterwards, he'll be joined by Alexander Mosgaard. He's the head of grid planning and development. And Evita is the distribution network operator. So I'll pass it on now to Niels Frank and Alexander for the next session. Thank you.
Thank you, Dorothy. And Christian, could you please disable screen sharing? Oh, you did that. Thank you. And here we go. So I hope you see my screen now. So my name is Niels Frank. I'm an engineer from Energinet. And I'm here to talk a bit about the green transition of the Danish gas transmission system. So some of the points Christian have already made, but I can try to give you a transmission system operator perspective of the same development. So just very shortly, in Energinet, we own and operate the transmission system in Denmark. That's both electricity and gas. And when I say transmission, I mean high voltage, high pressure pipes, not in the same line, of course. So we are state-owned, and I would say non-profit. And then it's not really true, but that's the way the regulation is. But we try not to be a commercial company. But that's just to understand that we don't produce any biomethane, we don't produce any power, we just transport it, and we try to treat everybody in our system equal. So Denmark is known for both a fairly strong development of renewables within the electricity side and also within the gas side. So electricity started early. So in the 80s, we started having wind turbines, and in the 19th, the first PV plants. And it took about 25 years to go from 1% to 38% of renewable electricity from wind and solar relative to the consumption electricity. During that time, I think there was a lot of focus in the transmission side that are we really able to handle this? Can we balance this? And so on. I think that I've heard these arguments many times, even when we only had like 10% or 15%. Now we are at the limit. As Christian showed, we also had a development in the gas system, starting around 13 with biomethane. So biomethane is biogas that has been converted, upgraded, as we could say, to natural gas quality. So the same grid quality as all the gas. Around 15, we reached 1% relative to the consumption, and within 8 years, we reached 38%. So the development is much faster than what we saw in electricity system, and I think could I say it took us by surprise. At least we were surprised that it went so quickly, and of course we had to do something in our grid to be able to handle this. So how did it go so fast? So Christian told about the subsidy scheme. There used to be a subsidy scheme where you had about 60 euros per megawatt hours in a feed-in premium. Also, we have a scheme for certificates, green certificates, operated by Energinet, that makes sure that if you produce biomethane, you receive a ticket that you have produced this biomethane, and you can then sell this certificate to someone consuming it. You can do this by doing this. You can sell the green value of this gas to customers in Denmark and Sweden, Germany, and other places in Europe. Then I think it shouldn't be overlooked that the biomethane plants have grown in size, and they are more like industrial plants today than earlier. Earlier they were small. They were maybe based on local farms going together in a community. And after the new subsidy or the old subsidy scheme, we saw that the unit size growth, and these were professional actors that tried to improve the process every time they made a new one, find new sources for revenue, increase the value of the fertilizer, and so on. So I think all in all, the subsidy scheme, the green certificates, and industrialization both increase the value of the product and also decrease the price of producing biomethane, which led to a growth. Then there's some technical issue. We decided on a TSO level to allow for up to 0.5% of oxygen in the gas. Fossil gas, at least from the Danish North Sea, does not contain any oxygen, but it's a residue of the biomethane upgrade process. So to ease the introduction of biomethane, we allowed for a higher share, believing that the biomethane would be very small amounts in the system, so it would not pose a problem. Little did we know. Then we have rules for mandatory grid connection, meaning that if you want to connect to the grid as a biomethane plant owner, you will contact either us or Alexander, so the DSO, and we will have to offer them grid connection. And I think when I speak to other countries in Europe, this is actually very crucial, because it's a barrier for entry in many places, that the grid owners are reluctant to offer them grid connections, or that it's very expensive to be connected. Then Evida, the DSO, and us have been working closely together to make sure that we have the right grid enforcements in the system, so that not only can the gas be connected, we also have a pathway for the gas to reach the consumers. And then, as Christian mentioned, we have a lower gas demand. It's very easy to reach a high target of relative biomethane share of gas demand if you reduce the gas demand. So what does it mean to have a higher biomethane in the share in the system? Well, first of all, biomethane from a technical point of view has slightly different calorific value, meaning that if you settle your bills in cubic meters, then your customers will receive maybe a slightly lower, or at least slightly different calorific value. So you have to account for that in somehow. Then there's the oxygen content, and for our point of view, so it doesn't give us any issues with the consumers of gas. We are a little concerned that there may be an issue for the underground gas storages, but as it is right now, they haven't been complaining too much. And it poses a problem when we want to export the gas physically, because some of the neighboring countries have not been quite as liberal with the with the oxygen content in the gas. So, for instance, Germany have a very strict policy of 10 parts per million of oxygen in the gas. That is almost nothing, meaning at the moment we are not able to physically export biomethane to Germany. We can still do it by the certificates though. Then the whole production on the distribution level is a completely turnaround of the gas system. So we go from upstream, very few sources production to downstream production on a regional level over 50 places in the grid. And this can lead to local balancing issues, so local oversupply of gas. And I think I mentioned it, TSO and DSO cooperation is crucial because, well, the DSO cannot solve this by themselves, and the TSO can definitely not solve this by ourselves. So the short story here. So Christian showed you the same graph. We had a steady growth starting in 13 in connection of biomethane to the gas system. Most of the plants are connected at Alexander's grid, so Evida. But in 2016, we saw the first plant being connected directly to the 80 bar transmission grid. So we had a continuous of growth, and in 17 we had to make the first reverse flow plant. I'll just show you a picture in the next slide in a moment. A reverse flow plant is a plant that takes gas from distribution and puts it to the transmission level. So basically just a compressor, you can say. And in 18, as Christian mentioned, the politicians got worried that they were spending too much money on biomethane support, and we could see a huge pipeline of new projects coming online. So they stopped this subsidy scheme basically from one day to another. In 18, we had the second reverse flow coming online. So you could see that the growth of biomethane continued even after the subsidy scheme, and that was due to, firstly, there was a huge number of plants in the pipeline that were coming online after that decision. And then there was a lot of plants that were so far in the planning that they complained to the politicians saying that you cannot stop the support now, we have invested too much money. And the politicians then found money, actually they sacrificed a future subsidy scheme for biomethane to support new developments within the old subsidy scheme. And so the growth continued. In end of 21, we could see some very high gas prices in Europe, and that led to demand reductions on industrial sites and on power plants in Denmark. And in 22, Russia invaded Ukraine, and that of course led to a lot of uncertainty of gas supply in Europe. And the Danish Energy Agency, among others, told the industrial consumers in Denmark that they should find alternatives for gas, and they did. So we saw a really strong reduction in demand. They found oil boilers in the industry. They converted to LPG or propane and did any kind of energy savings that were possible. So we kind of panicked at that time from a biomethane balance perspective, because we could see that consumption is down, and we saw a strong boost of the biomethane production. And that led us to plan ahead, saying, okay, how do we go to 100%? How do we make sure that we do this? Later, the gas prices returned to normal. I hate to say this, but for some reason, the war in Ukraine has become normal. Europe has reduced most of its dependency on gas from Russia, and also consumption has increased again. So you can see a small dip in the biomethane share, and also a plateau in production. I can just continue the graph a bit. You can see it has continued a bit. The plateau is, of course, because now nobody receives a new subsidy, and I think everybody is holding their breath for what's next. So I'll just show you a picture of this reverse flow unit. So this is one of them we made. Basically, it's a small unit, containment next to an MR station. MR stations are where we supply gas to the distribution level. So that's what the one in the background. So the reverse flow unit has some process equipment to remove odorant, so the smelly stuff we put into the gas to make sure that you can detect leaks. Don't have that on transmission level, so we have to remove it. That's the two columns there. Then it's basically compressors, and they are all piston compressors, so they are very flexible regarding the pressure that they feed into. There's some gas cooling, the gas gets hot, and some electrical equipment, and of course measurement. We have to measure every cubic meter of gas going back to the transmission level. So I think Christian told this, and I mentioned it myself. Everybody awaits a new subsidy scheme. So I think we have more than 80% projects in the pipeline that might come and might not come, more than doubling the biomethane production in Denmark if all come through. But even if they can make biomethane without a subsidy, they will wait until they see if they can pick up some money from the new scheme. We have some plants coming online, or at least working to come online without subsidies. So I don't know if they really can produce that cheap biomethane, or if they do it to test the market. But at least it shows that we are close to a level where you can produce biomethane, sell the gas and the certificates, and make some kind of money. Christian showed this graph in a more fancier way. It's just that Energinet uses outlook from the Danish Energy Agency to do our planning. And what the Danish Energy Agency says to us is that we should calculate or prepare for a much lower gas demand than we have today, and also much more green gas. So we will reach 100% in the 30s, basically. And the drivers for the future growth in this outlook, well, there will hopefully be some kind of new subsidy scheme. Maybe the system with a tender is out, but then they will have a mixing scheme or something like that. Then a lot of the plants that do biogas for power heat, they are considering or converting to biomethane, or they will be. There's the legislation allows them to switch subsidy scheme. So if you get a subsidy for electricity, you can convert that for a subsidy for biomethane. And since all the electricity producers are producing heat and power, they cannot produce that much in the summer. There's an advantage for the gas system where we mostly can take off all the gas during all year, even summer. Then we expect an increased utilization of the capacity. A lot of the biomethane plants are producing less than they can according to the grid connection agreements and the subsidy scheme agreements. And of course, they can optimize that production so they can reach a higher level. And then when the subsidy schemes end, we and the Danish Energy Agency expect that they will continue producing unsubsidized biomethane. So the most of the costs have been in the capex has been laid there, and we believe that they can have a sustainable business continuing production. And that's it for me, and I don't hope I've spent too much time, so over to Alexander.
Thank you, Niels. I will start sharing my screen. I hope you're all seeing it now. Thank you for inviting me to this session. Very pleased to tell a bit about the Danish experience from a DSO's perspective. I will try to go a bit into how we do this in practice, so that you might get an idea on how a DSO deals with biomethane. See if I can make my screen go on here. Oh, that went not very fast. I hope you're still seeing my screen. Just quick introduction to Evida. As Energinet, we are also a publicly owned company. We have about 500 employees and is owned by the Ministry of Finance. And as you can see on this map, in the orange lines, this is the distribution grid, and we are located in almost all of Denmark, which also means that a biomethane producer is relatively close to the grid if they seek to connect. We are the only DSO in Denmark. There's 2 cities with their own gas grid, city gas, but we are the only big DSO in Denmark. And just a brief introduction to where we are heading. Niels and Christian has already mentioned that we are seeing this increase in biomethane production, but at the same time as an increase in biomethane production, we are also seeing a decline in consumers. And it has already been mentioned, but if this presentation was made a few years ago, I would have said we had 400,000 customers. Now we are down to about 300,000 customers. So we see a lot of our customers going for district heating or going for heat pumps. So in the future, we will have much less private households connected to the gas infrastructure. Currently, there's a political ambition of 0 households by 2035. On top of this, we have this biomethane development, and we expect to have 100% biomethane by 2030 or 2032, something like that. Also, we expect an electrification of the industry and other businesses, which means that in the future, the gas grid will be more or less sort of a peak and reserve load grid, serving more industry and district heating and power plants. And these will be using it not as a base load as they did in the past, but more of this peak and reserve load. So the grid will be transporting less volume, but will still maintain a high capacity requirement for these peak and reserve loads. So in reality, the distribution grid is really changing in 2 significant ways, both this regarding the consumer, but also regarding the producer. And just to give a quick look into biomethane, it has already been mentioned, but here on the left side, there's a picture of renewable bioenergy. And as you can see, there are quite large plants. And that is definitely also something we have seen at Evida, is when these plants connect us, they are much larger now than they were a few years back. And we also have actually see that when these producers, they do connect, there's a good chance that they will be increasing in size as well. So when they did connect initially, there's a good chance they will be increasing their production rate in the future. On the map on the right, you see where we have biomethane production connected in Denmark. And as you can see, most of them are located in the western part of the country. And that is due to manure, as was mentioned. This is where we have the agriculture in Denmark. So this is where we also see biomethane development, although we do see it all over the country. Now I will try to give a brief introduction on how we then connect a biomethane producer in the 2 colors. I'll see if I can have a laser pen here. So basically, the biogas plant and the upgrading plant, that is related to the biomethane producer and has nothing to do with the Evida. As Energinet, we only transport the gas. We do not produce it or sell it or anything like that. We only transport it. So the biogas producer, he owns the biogas plant and the upgrading plant. We have nothing to do with this. Then from the upgrading plant, it has to go into a point of delivery where we pick it up and distribute it in the grid. This is called a receiving station, and this is where we check the gas quality if it is within specs. It's important that we do not let biomethane into the grid, which is not in with the required specification of gas quality. So this is where we check for gas quality and can shut off the gas production from the biomethane producer if it is not within spec. So this receiving station is quite important for this function. From the receiving station, we need to get to the grid. So there will be a pipeline to grid from the receiving stations. This can sometimes be short if we are really close by the grid. It can also be long. It depends on really the location of the biomethane producer. When it is then connected to the grid, we are also connecting it to this MR station, as Niels mentioned. And from this MR station, we have the possibility to use it in the local distribution grid. And this is usually always the case that we will try to use it locally in the local distribution grid. But most of the time, this local grid is just really small. And when we see so big biomethane producers, they will have a production much larger than the local city or can really have in consumption. So the distribution grid the local distribution grid is always nice to have some consumption, but usually it is too small. So we need to get it out of this local area and into more of a regional level, you could say. So for this purpose, we have a compressor taking it from the 4-bar distribution grid, the local grid, up to a 19 or 40-bar distribution grid. And now we are also entering steel pipes in Evida. So when we then have this compressor going to the steel pipes or the regional grid, you could say, then we have a larger area of consumption, which means that we can send it into other distribution grids at 4-bar level and then have a larger consumption, thereby making sure that this biogas is consumed regionally or locally. But sometimes this is not even working because the regional grid would also be full of biomethane. And then we have to call Energinet, Niels and his colleagues, and then they will be building a reverse flow compressor, taking it out from the distribution grid, the regional grid, into the main transmission pipes. And then this is where we really need help at the DSO level, is when we do not have enough consumption in our grid, then we are really dependent on good and close collaboration with TSO. And then Energinet can have a backflow compressor, and then it can be transmitted throughout the transmission grid. All of this also has to be paid by someone, so that the receiving station and the pipeline to grid is paid by the biomethane producer. We own it. Evida owns and operates this infrastructure, but it is paid by the biomethane producer. Then everything sort of behind the pipeline, so that is new compressor stations, backflow compressors regarding Energinet, all this is paid by the infrastructure companies. And then it's of course paid by the producers or consumers through the tariff system, but it is not directly paid by the biomethane producer. And regarding this tariff structure, Evida just this year made a new tariff system. And in the past, we still had this system I just said, where they pay the receiving station and the pipeline, but there was no tariff related to production. It was all a tariff related to consumption. And it had been like that for many, many years. But from 2025, we made this new tariff system, completely overhaul of the design, really. And now there's also a tariff for biomethane producing. They pay a volumetric tariff and a capacity tariff. based on their specific production and production capacity. And I've tried to translate it here in Australian dollars, so you can have an idea of the size of the tariff payments. Then, as I just mentioned, we also have this issue of grid planning, and on this graph you can really see what the issue is, because on the green line here, the green, you can see the daily consumption in a grid, and then on the red line you can see the biomethane capacity. And as you can see, we do have a problem here during the summertime. In Denmark, the gas consumption is very related to temperature, so if it's cold outside or if it's hot outside. And also during the summer, we have industry shutting off, having maybe 2 or 3 weeks not operating at a very high consumption rate. So during the summertime, we will have this issue of methane overproduction, you could almost say. At least locally, you will have an excess of biomethane. And this is really the challenge we're facing. And it's in this gap that we have the requirement to call Energinet and say, we have a problem and we need help handling with this overproduction of biomethane, because we cannot deal with it locally. We have to get it up on a national level. And we just see this in more and more places. So perhaps in the beginning, the biomethane production would have in this area would have been much lower, and it would have been quite easy to fix locally. But then as more and more biomethane production is added to the system, or maybe the consumption is reduced, then we start seeing these issues. And what we try to do is really see if we can handle it with line packing. Line packing is where you increase the pressure in the gas pipes, and this can handle something for a few hours or maybe a weekend. Then we try to set up compressors. We try to make grid connections where you connect 2 regional areas with new infrastructure, thereby increasing the consumption. And we also go for the transmission grids. And we have also looked into market incentives, however, without really any success on that regard. Sometimes do go wrong, and it's not always we can handle all of this biomethane excess. So we have really close collaboration with the biomethane producers. We try to warn them if there's a risk. During the summertime, we send out a weekly newsletter letting them know that we have a lot of problems, or that we do not have any problems, so that they can plan how they will be producing biomethane for that week. If they know for sure there will be an issue, they might change their production plans. So we really try to warn them of risk. Also, just 10 hours advance is really good for them to have. So we try to make a warning as soon as possible. Sometimes there will be some voluntary reductions, sometimes not, depends. But if all else does not work, we will be forced to have a reduction on the biomethane producers, so that the pressure in the system is not going too high. Also, that means,
We're coming up on time. You have to quickly finish so we can get through the rest of the slides.
Sure, this is almost the end. So flaring is sort of the last option. We really try to avoid that. Just here a picture of a compressor, so you can see what it looks like. It's really just a container with all the equipment, and it's modular, so you can put up several of them. And Niels has been through this strategic grid planning. Of course, we have a really good collaboration with Energinet, and we do this on a strategic level to make the best decisions for the gas system as a whole. And then just my really final remark is that biomethane and natural gas does not have the same gas quality. So we also have to do some gas quality simulations to have accurate billing. And that is also definitely really, really important to have accurate billing. And for this, we do have some simulation software which handles this for us. And that was actually my last slide.
Thank you, Alex, and thank you, Niels. Again, it's really important for us to share how the transmission and distribution operators work together in developing the biomethane network in Denmark. So just also to inform everybody, you'll be receiving a copy of the recording and the PowerPoint. So we'll be distributing that. And also we encourage the questions to be in the Q&A box. So at least our experts and our speakers would be able to answer your query. And if not, we will also be sending the answers via email. So for us, it's really good that we now know the gas distribution is being managed in Denmark. We are now going to transitioning on how biomethane integration between Denmark and Australia by our experts from Ramble, a global engineering consultancy who has a lot of expertise. And we have 3 of them today. Introducing Manuel Ortiz, he's the senior project manager and anaerobic digester specialist from Ramble. We have Sean Taylor, he's the senior managing consultant on impact assessments as well. And we have also Reza Yosri. He is our expert on developing biogas, bioenergy, and biomethane projects. So the 3 of them are very much experienced on doing due diligence and also exploring projects. And we will be learning from them how biomethane will also be transitioning and also how it can be developed in Australian context. I'll pass it on to you, Reza. Thank you.
Thanks, Dorothy, for the kind introduction. I'll share my screen and hopefully everyone can see it. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Reza, as Dorothy mentioned, and today we really want to discuss about achieving biomethane integration in Denmark and a bit of twist in Australia and some part of actually other jurisdictions as well. So really what I want to cover in this presentation with my colleagues is going to be why Ramble, a bit on the introduction about the Ramble, what we really should consider when developing and planning a biogas or anaerobic digestion project. And then we're going to deep dive in 3 main things, actually, which is going to be the feedstock sourcing, the digestate management, and also policy support and planning, permitting, and approval perspective of these projects. So why Ramble and why we are here? Ramble is a Danish consultancy firm. We present in more than 35 countries, more than 300 offices, more than 18,000 people. We have offices across Australia as well. And we've done biogas and AD projects for more than 30 years. And we delivered more than 200 AD and biogas related projects worldwide. And we have more than 50 people, dedicated AD experts. So as you can see from this figure, majority of the projects that we've done is in the Europe and also in US, but we see a great interest increasing in the APAC region as well, from India to countries like Thailand, Singapore, and also in Australia as well. But majority of the projects that we've been involved in Australia is in the early stages. And Ramble is something that we've done a lot of the work in this space, and some of the reference plans that we have, as mentioned by our Danish colleagues, is actually, it's going to be industrial scale, and some of them are more than 1 million ton per annum. So it's a massive industrial scale biogas projects. So let's a bit deep dive. When you want to plan a biogas project, what you need to really consider from really day one, which we call it 8 pillars or 8 building blocks that is going to be very important for the successful biogas project. So the first and the most important one is going to be the feedstock sourcing, which is going to be how you want to get the feedstock at the scale that you can produce the biogas. And that could be from different actually streams, from the ag waste to industrial waste, in Australia from food organics or CNI4, for example, or from sewage sludge or anything like that, which could be the source of the feedstock that you can have. But most importantly, again, the mix of these feedstock and the co-digestion, which is going to be very important in the Australian context, is going to be maximizing the methane yield and your biogas production. And then the transportation, which is very important topic in Australian context, and I'm going to cover that. It's going to be the key thing, and what you're going to do with the feedstock. Is it going to be required some pre-treatment? For example, in some cases, you're going to need pasteurization, and you need to consider that as well. And there's going to be the interim storage. And then you move it to the heart of the system, which is the production. So the AD itself, which is, again, you're going to have the AD process. There are different type of technology. You need to choose what sort of technology that you're after. For example, is it going to be wet anaerobic digestion, dry anaerobic digestion? What the temperature that you want to treat? For example, it's a low temperature mesophilic or high temperature, for example, thermophilic, or even different technologies. Another thing that you need to consider, which is the number 4, what you're going to do with your biogas, which is very important step. A lot of our colleagues discuss about the biomethane injection into the grid, which is the important topic as well. And then there's going to be different aspect of it, and you need to purify it to get the CO2 out as well. But we see a lot of the interest going into the biogenic content of the CO2 and valorization of it, which is something that's quite interesting. Then there's becoming like a commodity for different reasons, the biogenic portion of the CO2. And then what is going to be important is the digestate itself. So what you're going to do with after anaerobic digestion and you produce the biogas, there's going to be leftover in the tanks, and it's called digestate. And what you're going to do with the digestate, because it affects your business case, which Manuel is going to talk about this in very detail. And then the most important one from this is going to be the off-taker. So what you're going to do with the biomethane production, is it going to be injected to the grid? Is it going to be, for example, behind the meter producing the energy? Or is it going to be different aspect as well? Can you sell your digestate? Can you sell your biogenic CO2? So these are the type of the questions that needs to be answered. And most importantly, there is going to be a need for the policy support and market establishment. And you can see that actually everyone talk about the feed-in tariffs and feed-in premiums in our Danish colleagues, which is, let's acknowledge that in most cases, the biogas is going to be expensive, or biomethane is going to be expensive, and there's going to be a need for policy support to get some sort of certainty for the investor to produce the biomethane and utilize it. And the last one is going to be planning, permitting, and approvals, and all the risk associated with it, which my colleague Sean is going to talk about this in detail. So today's presentation, we're gonna go into all these 8 pillars. So we're gonna focus on the feedstock sourcing, digestate management, and also planning, permitting, and approvals, which is gonna be very important, and a bit on the policy support that you require for biogas projects. So why feedstock is important? Because identifying, as I mentioned, the right mix of the feedstock is going to be important. One thing that we should acknowledge, the feedstock density in Denmark is quite dense, and you can access to a lot of manure and any ag waste in a small, actually, radius of the biogas plant. But in Australia is something that actually, it could be a challenge, because Australia is a big country, and also the feedstock to get to this is going to be very important, because the feedstock, it should be a right mix of different things in Australian context to get to the scale that you are comfortable with. It could be anything from the manure, ag waste, energy crops as mentioned, or for example, from the industrial organic waste or CNI, or any, for example, oil and fats and organic fraction of the municipal solid waste, or in some cases, if it's a good fraction of the in the FOGO, that could be utilized as well. And then you have animal slurries and also sewage sludge that can be, again, co-digested. But again, sewage sludge is a bit tricky because of all these issues, such as, for example, PFAS, that everyone needs to be acknowledged. So the feedstock aggregation for a biogas project, reaching to the scale that financially it's going to make sense, it's going to be the key step. And securing for a long term, that could be another important step to be considered as well. And you need to consider different storage mechanisms to make sure that you can store it and then utilize it for the biogas production as well. One thing that it's in Australia is very important, and we see in the projects that you involve in for the industrial flow and the FOGO side of the things, that the gate fees makes a quite important implications on the financials of the project. Another thing that you need to consider as well, so in some states such as Victoria, that you need to consider some sort of pre-treatment or again sanitization or pasteurization of the feedstock to make sure that your digestate in the end can be considered as a non-priority waste, and you can get the exemptions there as well. So you need to consider this type of pre-treatment as well. Then what is going to be important is going to be the digestate management as well, which I'll hand over to my colleague Manuel, who has a great experience on this to discuss.
Thank you, Reza. So first, let's go to what is digestate. Digestate is the degassed biomass, as some of the previous colleagues mentioned. It's a nutrient-rich product resulting from the decomposition of the organic matter in the biogas plants. And while biogas represents 5 to 10% by weight, the digestate represents 90 to 95%. So in order to get this value molecule or this biomethane, we need to handle a lot of mass. And it's important to find an environmental friendly solution for it in each and every biogas plant. What are the current uses in Europe? Well, it differs significantly from country to country, but mostly it's used as a biofertilizer, and it's either used directly or after treatment. There are different methods and different ways. Here we are going to see on how it is, how it has a big influence on a biogas business case through 3 simplified cases. We see first in a case such as Denmark, where it's a mature market with an advanced system in place, where the farms and the farmers know the product and know how to engage with biogas producers, and they have an agreement to provide some feedstock and receive back some digestate in order to apply on land. However, there are new solutions being investigated to either reduce or sequester carbon or add produce some high value fertilizers, so can improve the business case. That being said, achieving where Denmark is with a quite simple system, it has taken, as some previous colleagues mentioned, also the 30, 40 years in the making to make sure that everybody, all the stakeholders required are well informed and can work with this setup. Another case that I want to touch is a market such as the Netherlands, where because of some specific market conditions and regulations, the digestate is probably considered as a waste and results with, it comes with a significant handling cost. It comes at a big burden to manage for the developers and for the industry. And as an example here, we put on a previous project we worked on where there was a 20 euros per ton handling cost of 300,000 tons per plant, resulting on 5 to 6 million euros per cost of cost per year for it. So it is important to find a sustainable and a simple solution that can enable the production of biogas with a sufficient or with a without requiring too many subsidies. And then the third case here is a country where there's a low penetration of AD, lack or limited experience. Farmers are unfamiliar with the digestate. Regulation is a bit unclear. How to read the regulation by the municipalities or regions is also unclear. People are afraid of what it is, of contamination and pollutions, even if it's not proven. And here we have seen maybe countries such as Spain. And here probably, Reza, you can put some words on why we have put Australia flag there.
Yeah, so it's very similar as well in Australian context. Is the only state in Australia, so is the Victoria, that we have a from the EPA, you have the digestate handling system for low risk digestate when you don't have a biosolids in the mix as well, which again, Sean is going to touch base on that. But the rest of the estates, we don't have a clear identification. And then it's called a priority waste, and you need to get the exemption to directly apply to the land, which adds a bit of complexity to the issue in here as well. So what you're going to do with the digestate. And also the farmers doesn't understand, because we have a low penetration of the AD as of now, the benefits of again, using digestate as a fertilizer, which is very important to consider, because it might add the OPEX as well, similar to Netherlands in this case.
Yeah. So summary, it can be a significant cost. It can also add a significant risk to the project, and also risk on the permitting side of things. So to expand a little more, and acknowledging that Australia is not exactly in the same conditions as Denmark because of the density I was mentioned, probably not the same model can be transferred. There are 5 models that have emerged in Europe, roughly. Again, it's a simplification, and probably Australia will need to figure out, or each region figure out which is the most fitted model for them. We can see here with different responsibilities on how to handle, from the first model where the AD company is responsible for the digestate management, transport of the whole digestate and application to land. Model 2 with a small variation that is transport via pipes to storage in the fields, although this system is quite uncommon. 3, there's a separation from the solid and liquid digestate, and each part is handled differently, or each fraction is handled differently, with or without additional treatment. Model 4, as we discussed before, when some specific companies are in charge for the transport and handling of the digestate. And 5, a more simple model with an agreement between the farmers and the suppliers, and farmers and the plants, that simplifies the exchange, and the digestate is sent back to land. There are, of course, quite a lot of requirements to be able to do this. There's European regulations that enforce what you can and cannot do with the digestate. Most of them also based on the feedstock coming into the plant. So there are limitations of what you can do if such a feedstock goes into the plant. Unfortunately, across Europe, some countries' readings of the European regulations and local norms will influence and will define the model that we see in a given country. Yeah, it makes a quite challenging market all across. Probably the key takeaway for the Australian context here is, as I see it from an engineer that I am, it's to, of course, find a sustainable solution, but try to keep the system as simple as possible, because complexity only adds costs, and the costs at the end will be transferred to either to the biogas or to whatever revenue. So it does not facilitate the industry if a too complex scheme is done. Although we should not compromise the sustainability of the solution. And here, a quick overview of what is digestate handling and what treatment options we commonly see. So the first and foremost is the separation between the solid and the liquids. The digestate is in itself, depending on the technology of the biogas plants, but typically in Denmark, it's a wet biogas, which a digestate coming out at 7 or to 10% total solids. And that you need to separate the solids from the liquids. The main reason is that most of the subsequent treatments are specific to either solids or liquids. So in order to do any other treatment afterwards, or most of them, in any case, you need to have separated. On the solid fraction, what we typically see, well, you have, of course, first the direct use, but alternatively, we have either composting that we see in quite a few countries, or thermal drying to produce pellets as fertilizers. And we also see other technologies such as gasification, hydrothermal liquefaction, and pyrolysis. These are new developments with a few pilot or early commercial plants, which come with some solutions, because it can be also a solution for some pollutants. And it also comes with the production of, for example, biochar that can be has been proven as a carbon sequestration technique for a very long period. On the other hand, we have the liquid fraction, where of course it can also be used as a biofertilizer, depending, some nutrients will remain within the liquid fraction. It can also be in some countries that this liquid fraction is treated to produce water that can be used on land. And we also see several technologies of nutrient recovery, mostly regarding or around nitrogen, which is typically the limiting factor in quite a few European markets for application on land. So it's important to find the best digested treatment solution for a given project, given the local constraints. Some of these technologies can be quite expensive, and it's important, as I said before, that the solution is kept simple if possible. Thank you, Reza.
Thanks, Manuel. So as Manuel mentioned, that the digested treatment is another important step. Look, let's deep dive. It's actually on the policy support and a bit on the planning, permitting, and approvals or impact assessments is going to be required for any biogas projects. So the real key enablers that or Energinet and also Evida has discussed this, which is going to be the pipeline connection. So they already covered this, and it's going to be very important to consider in Australian context as well. There is going to be clear structures that who is going to pay what in terms of the grid connection, in terms of the, for example, the reverse flow conditions, all the aspects, which is something that is currently under development as far as we know. And also we've got some standard actually injection equipment requires actually interconnection process, and it's going to be very important as well. So having said that, the market needs to be there as well, which is going to be the inclusion of the national gas targets and all these things, such as, for example, Victoria put it in place in Australia, which is going to be targeting and putting targets for biomethane production and to be utilized for the hard-to-abate sector, which is very important. And also whether or not there's going to be using these actually certification that I know the Green Power is going to discuss, and trading it's going to be important thing as well to consider. And also one thing that we see as well, some sustainability schemes might be important in the market as well, especially if you want to sell the biomethane as a form of bioenergy for the countries that are interested as well as an export. That could be, we see that it's something that actually picking up as well. And the integration with the guarantee of origin and also RGGO that probably Green Power is going to discuss this is going to be key step as well, which Australia is working on it, which is a good thing. And also, as discussed, right to inject policies is going to need it there as well, that you have access to the grid if it's possible, and then you can inject it to the grid as well. And all the jurisdictions needs to have a clear digestate management regulations that you can actually allow the safe and deployment of the digestate into the land or any other solutions to reduce the OPEX of these plants as well. And also, most importantly, there's going to be required financial support as well, as we've seen from the previous discussions, that feed-in tariff and feed-in premiums is something that is quite important, and that helped quite a lot. But we hear that there's going to be a need for the capital grants or any other type of grants that they might introduce in the future for the Australian context as well. That's going to be a quite important step. So all these policies that we see in Australia, it's actually developing over the past 6 months or a year. It's a significant progress that Australia has made, but it's more required as well in the federal level and also in all the levels to consider biomethane as a viable solution. So I'll give it to Sean to talk about the approvals as well.
Thank you, Reza. And so if we get through all those, it's through. And so what we've got here is, and I think there's the heading missing, Reza, but I've got in the left column in the light green is an outline of the Danish approval requirements for a biomethane production facility and connection to the grid, and then I've used two of the states here in Australia as examples. One of the complexities Reza touched on, we've got 6 states and 2 territories, so there's 8 different systems that we're working with here just in Australia, and they have varying degrees of complexity with them. As the previous speakers have all talked about, one of the things that the Danish approval process has in its favour is that it is a mature technology, and it's a known technology by the relevant agencies. So a process has evolved with acknowledgement of biomethane and biogas as a tested technology over the 30 years or more that it's been around, and facilitating that significant industry. Whereas as Manuel talked about in one of the earlier slides, here in Australia, it is still very much in the early stages of development. There is some uncertainty both from various stakeholders, be it farmers, be it government agencies, about the technology, and I think that is reflected in the complexities in the pathways. With Denmark, there is some very much standards around the approval pathway for biomethane, and a number of those agencies, be it the Danish EPA or the Agency for Green Land Use and Aquatic Environment, has teams that know the technology, and then also those very specific grid connection agreements and approval pathways, and also the handling of byproduct. And then finally the commissioning permits. And I think one of the key differences between Denmark and the Australian jurisdictions is the acknowledgement that the digestate is a byproduct and a useful product. Whereas I think in Australia, both the digestate but also the inputs to the process, it's seen as a waste management problem rather than a resource that can produce something of benefit. New South Wales, I can talk to that. I'm based in Newcastle in New South Wales, and have worked on navigating a project through the approval process, and it is quite complex, a number of stakeholders, and I know the time's coming up, so I'll keep it short. But yeah, be it it's regulated as a waste management facility, and potentially as an electricity generating works, depending on the technology that's applied. But the key one that comes down to the digestate as well. In New South Wales, there are a number of resource recovery orders and exemptions that apply either in a general sense or very specific to a process and an end use. There are a number of orders and exemptions that apply to associated materials such as manure, food waste, effluent, biosolids, composting, but there isn't anything that applies to digestate in New South Wales. as Reza touched on, Victoria is the only jurisdiction in Australia that does have exemptions that relate to low risk digestate. And they also have a process, an approval process that's more advanced in relation to waste to energy on a larger scale, but as part of that, the organic waste processing and seeing it as a resource. It's probably one of the most advanced jurisdictions in Australia. So I'm noting time, and just I think there is a lot of lessons that Australia needs to take from the Danish and the European experience to facilitate these projects and see them both the inputs and the outputs of this process as a resource rather than as a waste problem to be handled.
Thanks, Sean. I'll be just one slide, Bill, and I'll be finished. It's just going to be those 8 steps that I mentioned: the feedstock sourcing, the logistic, the AD process itself, upgrading process, digestate, and also the offtake policy and planning permitting. All these 8 needs to be in place to make sure a biogas and AD plant is going to make financially and economically viable for a project. And we acknowledge that Australia is working hard and it's close. The potential for the feedstock is there. The federal and also state-based policies are developing, and definitely tick all these boxes, definitely all these projects is going to come to the picture, hopefully.
Thanks, Reza. So we're going to have to move on. So, but the slides will be made available to all the participants. So thank you very much. Over to you, Dorothy.
Thank you, Bill. And again, thank you, Reza, Manuel, and Sean. It was very insightful, really engaging. And also thank you for highlighting the key enablers and also the different handling methods and treatment. So it's very interesting that you gave also a comparison of different countries that are working on the biomethane space. So we'll definitely look forward on sending and receiving more questions on that. So we're now moving on to bioenergy updates on the Australian perspective. We have 2 doctors that are bringing and giving us an update. We have Dr. Scott Grierson. He's the executive committee member of Renewable Gas Alliance from Bioenergy Australia, and also managing director and CEO from Valorify. And we will be joined by Dr. Brad Bailey. He is the renewable fuels leader from Green Power. And at the same time, he's the senior project officer for clean energy programs at DQ New South Wales, or the Department of Climate Change, Environment, and Water. So again, we'll pass it on to Scotty, and then Brad will be continuing on. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Dorothy, and tusen takk, danske venner. Thanks very much to our Danish friends. Fabulous to learn from your experience and hear some of your mistakes, but also, you know, so much of the great progress that's been achieved. So we're going to shift gears, as Dorothy said, and talk a little bit about what's happening in Australia. I have the honour of representing Bioenergy Australia on this webinar this afternoon or this evening, and also the Renewable Gas Alliance, particularly as a subset of that organisation. So the RGA, the Renewable Gas Alliance, has a specific purpose to create an environment that drives a high-level understanding, uptake and engagement of renewable gas in Australia. So we've got a number of key activities and focal points, I guess, for our activities. But primarily we're looking to accelerate the development of the industry and obviously sell that story about jobs and benefits to the Australian economy, and stories such as those we've heard today certainly will help us to do that. A focus for us is very much on decarbonising hard to abate sectors of Australia's economy. And again, we've seen in the Danish experience this evening also how important that's been in driving a lot of their thinking and activity in policy making. For the RGA, our focus is on delivering a commercially viable and environmentally sustainable sources of renewable gas for those sectors in Australia. And this needs to happen with the support of the right policy settings and market incentives. So we do a lot of work in the advocacy space as well in trying to actually set the market up for success. So in terms of bioenergy opportunities in Australia, Australia's $100 billion manufacturing sector consumed about 292 petajoules of the total volume of natural gas that was used nationwide. This is from 22-23. So it's the country's largest industrial gas user or segment, essentially. So the key message there being that the natural gas is essential to Australian manufacturing. There's numerous studies, and I'll point to some of these at the end of this presentation, but it's been identified that there's approximately 400 petajoules of biomethane that has been identified as being recoverable today through anaerobic digestion processes, and that's by leveraging existing feedstocks that are familiar to many on the call, such as FOGO, agricultural residues, livestock byproducts, etc. On the East Coast, the technical biomethane potential could meet up to 96% of current East Coast gas demand. But I would also point to that story from Denmark again of the two elements of the process working in tandem. That is the reduction of demand in the sector at the same time as production is going up. So I think it's more than eminently possible that we could replace 100% of that remaining hard to abate industrial demand in due course. By 2050, the projections are that biogas could create more than 18,000 full-time jobs, mostly in regional Australia, and contribute a whopping $50 billion to GDP. Some recent policy developments. There's been a lot going on in Australia. For anybody that's following the news reels, it's been a pretty busy time. But recent federal announcements, for instance, of the $1.1 billion cleaner fuels program, particularly with a focus on low carbon fuels. There's been some major amendments that kicked in from July 1 here in Australia under the ENGAS scheme, which enables Scope 1 emissions reductions for procurement of renewable gas to be counted against reportable emissions for major companies. So that's a huge step forward for us. We've seen the establishment of the Future Made in Australia initiative, which is very much around preserving, supporting and growing the Australian manufacturing sector. So that certainly plays into our interests. More recently, in only the last month, there was an Energy and Climate Change Ministerial Council that brought together federal and state-based representatives that have agreed to put forward and develop a national renewable gas policy, which is a really important step forward. There's been the release of the Australian Net Zero Plan and importantly, a breakdown within that of different sector emissions reduction plans. So targeted sort of emissions reductions, which we think biomethane can make a major contribution to across a number of different industry sectors. There's been an expansion of the Guarantee of Origin scheme to include low carbon liquid fuels and biomethane, and perhaps we might hear a bit more about that shortly from Brad. There's now consultation open. I would urge anybody that has an interest in the sector, there is now consultation open on the development of a national feedstock bioenergy strategy. At the moment, with that low level of penetration in the sector in the current in the Australian context, we really need to push very hard to aggregate those feedstocks and build awareness around the potential and the opportunities that these different feedstock streams can represent. We've also had the Green Power Renewable Gas Guarantee of Origin certification scheme formally launched, and Brad again can talk to a little bit of that in the next presentation. We've seen the release of Australia's future gas strategy, and we're delighted on behalf of our colleagues at Delorean Corporation to see that ARENA recently placed a $6 million grant under the Industrial Transformation Program to accelerate their project over in South Australia. At a state-based level, there's also been a lot of activity. So the New South Wales Renewable Fuel Scheme, we're expecting to be released imminently. It was due perhaps about a month ago, or expected a month ago. These things have a habit of drawing out, but certainly there is reform and potential expansion to the RFS to also include biomethane. So we're waiting anxiously for that announcement to come forth. Under the New South Wales Government's Net Zero Manufacturing Funding Initiative, there's $100 million on the table for low carbon product manufacturing, which is a great advance. In Victoria, there has been the Industrial Renewable Gas Guarantee Directions paper, which is working towards the launch of a renewable gas target in the state of Victoria, which is a good step forward. Again, waiting for that to be released, hopefully later this year, expected before Christmas. In Queensland, there's been a Sovereign Industry Development Fund launched for $180 million that is going to play into our interest in the broader bioenergy sector, which is to support growth in defence, biomedical and biofuels industries. Western Australia has just more recently put in their WA plan $1.2 million of investment to deliver an advanced biofuel strategy, and Tasmania, with their bioenergy vision, is aiming to embed bioenergy into their overall energy planning and economic forecasts. So finally, I did make some reference during that quick overview to a couple of seminal reports that have been launched more recently. The first from Deloitte, which is a report backed and funded by Bioenergy Australia, which is all about unlocking renewable natural gas to enhance energy security. So I encourage you to have a look at that if you haven't already, and read through that. There's some fantastic material in there that really lays out the opportunity for us here in Australia. And ENA recently launched, with the assistance of Blunomi, the biomethane opportunities to decarbonise Australian industries report, which likewise helps to really get quite granular in looking at what the scale of that opportunity looks like for Australian industry. So really encourage people to get across those reports and to keep abreast of developments, because there is certainly a lot happening. Keep yourselves tuned, because between now and Christmas there's going to be a lot more to come. But without further ado, I'll pass over to Brad. Brad, over to you to give us your update.
Thanks, Scott. I'm just waiting for my slides to come up. Just 1 second. Just bear with me 1 second. Okay. Hopefully my slides come up now. All right, fantastic. Thanks everyone for hanging around as we rapidly approach dinner time here on the East Coast of Australia. My name's Brad Bailey. I'm the Renewable Fuels Team Lead at Green Power. Today, I'll give you a brief intro into who Green Power is and what we do. Then I'll provide you with an overview of Green Power's renewable gas certification, which has been mentioned by the last couple of presenters. It's designed to help accelerate the growth of the renewable gas sector in Australia and decarbonise gas use from those hard to abate industries. Sorry. I'll then wrap up with where Green Power is going next and what our certification development looks like in the future. So Green Power, so for those that aren't familiar, we're a national renewable energy accreditation program, which is run on behalf of all the states and territories. We certify renewable energy products that retailers and certificate traders sell to make sure that customers get that green product that they're paying for. We've been around since 1997 for renewable electricity. We currently have over 500 accredited renewable electricity generators. So these generators create and sell certificates to around 230,000 residential customers and 30,000 businesses Australia-wide. So this has been working really well for renewable electricity to date, and we want to replicate that, or we wanted to replicate that. So around 4 years ago, we set up a certification scheme for renewable gases. So it took around 2 years to design, and then we launched in August of 2023. So it's really to light up that switchboard to ignite demand for renewable gas in Australia. It was touched on by Reza just earlier. Firstly, it's really important to understand what the value of certification for renewable energy can bring to both consumers of the energy and producers. So certifications and renewable energy certificates provide a way for consumers and businesses to verify that the green energy they purchase, comes from truly renewable sources and is in fact zero or low emission. For certifications like Green Power's, strong environmental standards are set to achieve positive environmental and social outcomes, and for customers to make those credible claims. Certifications enable renewable energy generators and producers to extract that real green premium for their products through certificates sales, and that provides them with that additional revenue stream to help with their project economics and such that they can compete with their fossil fuels peers. So onto our Green Power renewable gas certification. So one of those 8 factors that are really required to set up a renewable gas or biomethane industry in Australia. As I mentioned, around 4 years ago, Green Power identified a gap in the certification space for renewable gases. So we spent 2 years designing, testing it, launched in August 23. It's supported by a dedicated Australian-based certificate registry platform, which certificates are created, traded, retired. And these certificates are called Renewable Gas Guarantee of Origins, so RGGOs for short. The scheme's a voluntary scheme. It's available to any projects right across Australia and uses a book and claim approach to market-based accounting. So this provides the flexibility that sort of projects can, or developers can use. So it means that projects can inject their gas into the gas network at one location and sell the associated certificates for that gas production to a gas user anywhere in Australia. And that really facilitates low cost and low emission biomethane production. Now, to ensure that the scheme that we've developed is the gold standard when it comes to renewable gas certifications, we've set really strict environmental and social eligibility criteria that renewable gas projects have to meet to participate in the scheme. So these include things like all inputs to the production process must be renewable, like biogenic feedstocks and renewable electricity use. So it all has to be sourced from within Australia. There's an emissions intensity threshold for the production process. Projects need to demonstrate that they're using water sustainably, and there also needs to be demonstration that it's going to, projects are going to make net positive environmental and social outcomes. With respect to the objectives, it says it there. So we really want to help build the renewable gas sector by providing that mechanism for the renewable gas producers to get that additional revenue stream through the green premium. We also want to support gas using businesses to decarbonise, particularly those that aren't able to decarbonise through other means like electrifying their processes. The eligible gas types, biomethane, biogas, e-methane and renewable hydrogen. And Scott just stole my thunder earlier about the carbon accounting side of things for renewable gas certificates. So up until very recently, carbon accounting frameworks such as NGERS didn't recognise renewable gas certificates for Scope 1 emission reductions. But as of July this year, businesses now can purchase our certificates to reduce their Scope 1 emissions, which is absolutely huge for the renewable gas industry that really ignites demand. And it's also massive for those industries that really want to decarbonise, to do the right thing. Gives them that option. Before I move off the renewable gas certification, just in my background picture here, you can see the Gemini-owned Malabar biomethane project in Sydney. It is the first of our accredited biomethane projects, and we're really optimistic. We share Scott's views on how confident we are that this industry can grow. All the switches on the switchboard are starting to light up. We really think that the industry is going to hopefully have a growth trajectory similar to what we've just seen Denmark has achieved. Okay, so since the renewable gas certification is up and running now, we've been looking at where else Green Power can expand our certifications to support renewable fuels to displace fossil fuel use in other sectors. Okay, so to broaden the breadth of our decarbonisation. So through 2024 and 25, we investigated certification options for different renewable fuel types, as well as biofuels byproducts. Each type of renewable fuel type and byproducts were assessed against things like what's the current and forecasted Australian offtake demand, what's the abatement potential of each renewable fuel, are there any national energy security issues, what are the TRLs and CRLs of different production pathways, and finally, what is the willingness of customers to pay a green premium for these green products, green fuels. So this work came to a head and we were able to produce a prioritised certification list from which we landed on a decision to develop 2 new certifications in parallel, which are under early development right now. The first being a biogenic CO2 certification and the second being a low carbon liquid fuel or LCLF certification, both being a book and claim system to provide that flexibility to be able to locate projects optimally where the feedstocks are, irrespective of where the end users or customers are. So that really can maximise industry growth. On the biogenic CO2 certification, we heard a little from Reza earlier about biogenic CO2, but for those that aren't familiar with what it is, it's CO2 resulting from the combustion or the digestion, fermentation or decomposition of biogenic materials. So it's a key byproduct of biofuels production and use, particularly biomethane production, where large volumes of biogenic CO2 is scrubbed out of biogas to create biomethane. So biogenic CO2 is part of the natural carbon cycle. This is really important. It's additive. It's not additive to the atmospheric carbon like fossil CO2 is, which has been unlocked from underground for millions of years. So there is a growing demand for CO2, particularly in the future as the e-fuels market does develop. So we do feel that having a biogenic CO2 available in Australia will support current biofuels projects get up and running, and then for manufacturers to be able to produce greener products. For the low carbon liquid fuel certification, again, we have a thirst for low carbon for liquid fuels in Australia, and that is forecasted to grow through to 2050, and it makes up a huge chunk of Australia's emissions profile. So we also have a energy security risk because we currently import over 90% of our liquid fuels from our northern neighbours. Much of it is shipped through these geopolitical hotspots too, so there is a real risk there. So we really need to develop our own low carbon liquid fuel certificate, our low carbon liquid fuel industry, and having a robust, flexible certification like we're going to produce will really kickstart that industry. So I'll leave it there for now. I know we're running out of time, so lots more to come on this over the coming months, but I'll hand it back to Dorothy now. Thanks.
Thank you, Brad. Thank you, Scotty. It's really great to hear updates and also what's coming up from both Denmark that's future looking on the new trends, and also in Australia. We are very optimistic on that. So we now pass it back on to Scotty to have everyone on board for a quick panel discussion. And again, thank you for bearing with us for those who stayed put. Thanks, Scotty.
Thanks, Dorothy. We've only got about 12 or 13 minutes really to run through this panel discussion, conscious of time. So I'll ask you to keep your responses as brief as possible. But we've got a couple of questions to throw to the panel. So firstly, to Christian, to Niels and Alexander, if you were to pinpoint the 3 to 5 sort of top ingredients, and there were flavors of this throughout your presentations, but what are the top 3 to 5 things that you think are necessary in order to achieve the success that has been seen in Denmark?
Well, if I can start, I think the main cause of our great success is that in Denmark we have a broad political agreement on the climate and energy policy. So we create an environment of certainty for investors. And what we also did at the same time back in 2012 was also to create a long-term support scheme. And without that, we wouldn't have gone this far. We are now looking into other incentive schemes, so things will definitely change. Also on regulation is that it is important you have certainty, especially also on the sustainability issues. If, for instance, in EU, we have different sustainability regulation depending on where you use the biomethane. Do you use it for heating? You have one regulation. Are you using it for transport? You have a different. And that's not the way to forward. So, yes.
Yes, and not much to add to Christian. So a stable framework, you need to have the biomass resource available. So, and then we also believe it's really important that the DSO, TSOs work together to connect these biomethane plants to the grid.
Anything to add, Alexander?
No, I think Niels stole my point that I think the close collaboration with the TSO and DSO is really important, and that you figure out a way to do this collaboration in a good manner and make some strategic plans on how to deal with this. And I would say for handling this, things sort of modular cases, at least for the DSO, it's nice to have a set system with same standards, same machine, different place sort of approach to it. So make some standard solutions. That is very helpful.
Excellent. Thank you very much, guys. If I can move on to our colleagues at Ramboll and throw to you. We've heard from the Danish experience that we see a genuine sort of trend and movement towards larger scale centralized plants. that are grid connected, and of course a big focus now on biomethane upgrading and injection. So given that the Australian economy though is somewhat different structurally to the Danish economy, what do you see as the opportunity in Australia? What are some of the similarities and differences? And is there a place for small scale biogas projects here, or do we just leapfrog right past those?
Yeah, I'll make a start and then pass it to Manuel for adding more info. But again, that's a great question, Scotty. So first of all, definitely one thing that we need to acknowledge is the feedstock density in Australia is quite different to Europe and Denmark particularly, and we need to acknowledge that. But again, there is a room for the co-digestion in some cases, or any other, for example, applications such as straw and other things that could be going to the scale in some cases and reaching to the point that you can have 200 plus TJ projects, which is the medium to large scale projects with the enough feedstock that you can inject it to the grid as well. But also there might be still a role for the small scale projects as well if there is a nearby power purchaser or someone needs to for example, abattoirs or something like that, that might be they are not close to the grid connections, or they're not actually in the remote area. They might be again behind the meter solution type of a thing apply to Australian context as well. But definitely, if you have the scale, the capex, opex, the LCOE, and all these things are going to reduce, and it makes it quite more sense. But Manuel, if you want to add additional thing,
just quickly, if you
no, sorry, go ahead, Scott.
Please, if you have anything to add.
Yes, sure. No, totally agree with Reza. You need to adapt to the country. Maybe some regions of Australia can copy the Danish way of connecting to grid when you are close to dense urban areas and you have sufficient waste, while other rural urban areas will need to adapt and find a co-location with consumers directly. We have seen such projects globally that maybe is a first step to decarbonize directly, and also some locations where they need a solution for their biological waste that is generated. So a hybrid model, it's probably sensible.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to move on back to the guys over in Denmark. This is a bit of a curly one and potentially a very complex question to ask, but if you can keep your responses as succinct as possible. We heard how you have an increasing scale and also increasing overall production of biomethane, particularly at low pressure distribution levels in places like Jutland, where a lot of the resource is actually located. At a certain point, as we heard in the story from Alexander, you begin to max those out and oversaturate. So there's this tendency and move towards reverse flowing. Do you see a time where you're going to be injecting directly into transmission pipelines and bypassing distribution altogether? And are you seeing an acceleration in the decline of particularly the household customers that are connected because of increasing tariff burdens that are shifting to them in support of these connections?
So let me just give you a quick answer first. So first of all, we only have 1.5 plants connected to the transmission grid at the moment directly. Everything is connected on DSO level by that. There could be a tendency that you would like to have more gas on the transmission pipeline, but there's still a good idea to have it on DSO level if you still have consumption there, because we have winter and we have a higher consumption in the winter, and it's cheaper to keep it there. Connections to TSOs are much more expensive because you need a higher pressure, basically. And probably not to disregard the standards of the DSO level, but everything just becomes more expensive when you want to have it on transmission level because of safety issues and so on. We have some very large biomethane plants in the pipeline, and there we may indeed see it as the only way to really connect them directly to transmission. And regarding the consumption, the drop in consumption, the household, the first priority is actually to have industrial consumption in the areas, because it's the summer situation that is the difficult situation. There you don't have any consumption for heating, so it doesn't really affect the reverse flow need in any way. Sorry to Alexander.
I fully agree with you, Niels. I think I would just add that regarding the connection to grid, the TSO grid in Denmark is not as widely extensive as the DSO grid. So on DSO grid, you will have a fairly short connection. And if you also go for the TSO grid connection, you need to be located in some more specific areas to be nearby. Otherwise, you will have really long connection lines, and they will of course be expensive. And if you can afford expensive lines, then you need to be like a really, really big plant.
I'm going to go off piece just briefly. One of the challenges with prioritizing gas for industrial use in Australia, and I'm sure it's, I wonder if it's the same in Denmark, is that as there is that decline in household consumers, it shifts the burden of fixed costs in the network increasingly to those highly price sensitive industrial users. Is there plans to help sort of ease that burden for heavy industry and hard to abate sectors in Denmark? Maybe Christian?
Yes, we had this discussion, and the industry's point of view is that those who are benefiting from the gas system should pay, and that's mean that we actually now have introduced feed-in tariffs for at the distribution level, which have until now been free. So there will be a shift of who's paying to the gas grid, and of course the Biogas Association have not been very happy about this. But well, who's going to pay if you don't have the households? And of course that should be those who are benefiting from the gas grid.
Right, thank you. So maybe another question, really, both, well, this is a regulatory question, I suppose, for Brad and for Christian across both sides of the world. But given that biomethane certification under ISCC EU is now very well established, what do you think has worked well? And if you had your time again, Christian, and you were redesigning the scheme, what would you do differently? What lessons have you learned through that experience?
Yes, Denmark have been a first mover on biomethane, and we also have reached the first problems. As I shortly touched on my presentation, is how to deal with the cross-border trade. That's an EU thing, but I know that from Australia that you also have different regulation or different targeting in different states in Australia. So you should really think through the whole system beforehand. What we have now is a production support which receive guarantee for origin, but they are now exporting it. Some part of it counts towards German target, some part of it counts towards Danish target, and that's a mess. So think carefully about how you also count your targets, and don't have too many targets.
Yeah, I can jump in there as well. I think my camera may have been not working before, so apologize for that. On this, I think in Australia, I think it's really important for us to get the social license part right early, so that we don't get mixed up with our fossil gas peers. So there's a lot of conjecture at the moment and criticism of the gas industry. So we need to get some early education piece out there, whether it comes from government or some other trusted organisations, such that to inform what biomethane is, the benefits, how it is different to fossil gas. So I think that's really important, and I think certifications will be really critical to driving that as well. So we want to avoid things like the food versus fuel debate. We want to ensure that there are strict environmental and social eligibility criteria. They are really key. And then I think to ensure that we do get that industry growth, we need that book and claim system. That's really critical to allow for those low cost and low emission projects to get up and running.
Right. Thank you, Brad. We'll have to call it to a close there, I'm afraid. We're out of time. There was a lot of activity in the Q&A, I think, and possibly there may be an interest in sending around some responses to those via email and follow up to this. But over to you, Bill, to wrap it up. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. And yes, we'll collect the questions that haven't been answered. Thank you very much to the panelists who've already answered most of them during the procedure. I'd just like to really thank the experts that we've brought together here in Australia and from Denmark. This very interesting open session obviously talked to many of the real world challenges that have come from this long, rich history that Denmark has shown. But it's clear that there's a role here for biogas, a strong role within the energy transition. We need to build on the lessons that we can take from that sort of 40 to 50 years worth of rich experience, but also then bring in the Australian nuance and understanding. And we've talked to some of the challenges here around things like feed, co-digestion, etc. So I hope that everyone online, saw great value in this, that they've learned something from this. We'll definitely share the outcomes of the presentations, but also the questions that we've been asked. I thank everyone for their attendance, and it's excellent to see online. And thank you again for the speakers for doing a fantastic job.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.